Good evening, everyone. We're excited to have you. We're just getting started, and we have lots of people popping in as we speak. So we're going to give it just a few moments. So everybody get comfortable, enjoy yourself. We have a really exciting evening planned, and we're just going to give it a few moments while we watch this participant tally count up. So we'll formally begin in probably a minute or two. So we got our first shout out all the way from South Orange, New Jersey is saying hello in the chat. I don't know if everyone can see that or not, but thanks for being here. South Orange, New Jersey. That's exciting. And we have Orlando, we have Georgia, Tampa. This is great. So excited to have you. Worcester, Canada, California, Ohio, Iowa, California. Wow, Shenandoah River. Gosh, great to see everybody. So glad you're joining us. Hi from Morocco. Oh my gosh, hello. Singapore, good morning. Wow. Talk about a truly international event. New Zealand. Wow. China. This is exciting. Thank y'all for being here. Tina's in East Cobb. There you go, Tina. I love it. Bulgaria. Wow, this is amazing. So if you're just now joining us, hello. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes while we get everybody to pop on and get started. It's about 6:33. I'll probably give another minute or so. There's nothing like starting behind. It's always the plan, regardless of what we think otherwise. So we'll give everybody just a few minutes more, and we'll get everybody on. So again, thanks for being with us. We had over 1,000 folks register for this evening, which is unbelievable. So excited about that. And we're sitting at about 270 people right now. So I'm going to give it just a couple more minutes since we did. We know not everyone's going to be able to join us live. And many folks will be able to access this recording afterwards, but we'll give everybody a couple more minutes. I got, again, all over the country, all over the world. People are chiming in on the chat. We got hi from the Bronx. My mom grew up in Yonkers, not too far from there. So great to have you with us. So glad you joined us. So gonna give it just a couple more minutes while we wait on everybody. It's 6:34. We'll probably officially get started at 6:35, and then that way folks can, of course, just jump in as we go. But again, Manila's in the house. Unbelievable. Sonoma. So great to have all these folks joining us tonight. So appreciative of you taking the time and joining us in this incredibly important conversation and this shared desire to help our dyslexic learners have all that they need to be successful. So glad to have you. All right, I am showing that it's officially 6:35, so I am going to go ahead and get started. And of course, we can have folks join us as the evening goes on. But I'm so excited to have you all here. Again, in the chat right now, we have folks identifying themselves from literally all over the world, which is so exciting. So thank you. My name is Josh Clark. I'm the head of school at the Schenck School, which is an independent school in Atlanta, Georgia, that specializes in students with dyslexia. I'm also the executive director of Dyslexia Resource, which is the outreach arm of the Schenck School. And we focus on empowering communities to serve dyslexic learners through tutoring, training, and education. So we are so excited to be able to bring this event to you all tonight as part of that larger mission to do all we can to support dyslexic learners and really all struggling readers. Tonight, we are so fortunate that we have some sponsors and co-hosts of the event. We want to thank the International Dyslexia Georgia branch, who has been a sponsor and supporter tonight. BrainLENS, Literacy How, and the Georgia Department of Education all came together to make tonight happen. And again, we are so appreciative of everyone taking the time. I think, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, we had over 1,000 people register for this event. It's the largest, certainly the largest web event we've hosted. So honored and excited to have that, and so glad that this topic that we're going to dive into tonight resonates with so many of you. So I think, as you're all aware, we have just some really phenomenal speakers, really some of the absolute experts in the world on this topic, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, who are going to talk to us tonight about the importance of early identification and intervention. And what I'm excited about is we're first going to have a conversation about the science, the brain science, the research behind this kind of growing field, and then have a moment to speak a little bit more about the actual application in the classroom. What does this mean? What does this look like as educators, as folks on the front lines? How can we take this incredibly important information and apply it? And then we also are very fortunate that one of our presenters, Dr. Hoeft, is also going to be sharing with us kind of a sneak peek of her prize screener. And I'll certainly let Dr. Hoeft speak about that more in a moment, but we're very excited to have it. It's actually not even on the market yet. It's still going through some final stages. So we're very fortunate and kind of a rare opportunity to get to see this in person. So we are so appreciative of that. Also, quick logistical before we turn things over. I want to make sure everyone knows, as you're doing right now, if you have any questions throughout the evening, please be sure to put them in the chat. Feel free to put them in the chat if you have any questions. At the end of tonight's presentation, we are going to have a moderated Q&A. We'll only have about 15 minutes for that time. We have so much rich and exciting information that it's going to be a little difficult to get to all the questions. And again, with this size of an audience, we've never quite moderated at this large before, but we're hoping that we can get to many of them. So questions at any point, please put in the chat. And just for anyone that might be watching from home, most of you should, your video and your audio should be disabled anyway, but just in case, if for whatever reason it's not, always best, we can always mute ourselves if we're having any problems, because that keeps us from any distractions or things of that nature. So with that, again, we're so excited for tonight's presentation, because again, we have two the world's leading researchers in this area. And I have to tell you that both Dr. Fumiko Hoeft and Dr. Margie Gillis, who I will more properly introduce in just a moment, not only are these just incredible leaders in this field with an incredible amount of knowledge, they are also two of the most down-to-earth, practical people that I have ever met. And every time I speak with them about dyslexia, about this particular topic, anytime when we engage, I always walk away feeling like I have learned so much, and yet I also don't feel dumb, which is an easy thing for me to feel. But Dr. Hoeft and Dr. Gillis are so adept at making all this very complex information so accessible. So we're in for a real treat tonight. And then also, after our presentations tonight, we also have an amazing opportunity where Dr. Caitlin Dooley, who is the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning for the Department of State for all of Georgia, is also going to be giving us an update on what's happening with Senate Bill 48, which is a piece of legislation that was passed in the last couple of years in the state of Georgia to again try to advance and support more dyslexic learners. So with that, I'm going to formally introduce our speakers and then turn the evening over to them. And forgive me, because the dyslexic guy is going to read out loud for a second. So I'm going to do my very best with this, and I know I have a safe audience. But first, I want to talk about Dr. Fumiko Hoeft, who is a professor of psychological sciences, mathematics, psychiatry, and neuroscience at the University of Connecticut, and of psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. She's also the director of UConn's Brain Imaging Research Center and co-founder of the Haskins Lab Global Literacy Hub. She's a neuroscientist who has been conducting research on learning, and in particular reading and dyslexia, with a particular focus on early identification, building resilience, and compensatory, can't even read it correctly, forgive me, mechanisms in dyslexia over the past 18 years. Dr. Hoeft is also the recipient of many prestigious awards. Her work has been featured in publications we're all familiar with, from the New Yorker to the New York Times, CNN. She's presented all over the world, including at the White House. And Dr. Hoeft, again, is going to be speaking to us tonight with a little bit of research and updates on the science behind our topic. And then Dr. Margie Gillis is going to be presenting, and she's a certified academic language therapist, a research affiliate at Haskins Laboratories, and the president of Literacy How, a nonprofit organization that provides professional development for teachers on how to apply the science of reading. Margie is also the president of the Ann Fowler Foundation, providing scholarships for educators. She's the co-founder of Smart Kids with LD, the former president of CON-BIDA, a board member of the Academic Language Therapy Association, the Reading League of Connecticut, and a New Alliance Foundation, and a professional advisor for Understood ReadWorks and the International Foundation for Effective Reading Instruction. And again, in such a treat for both of them. And later on this evening, after their presentation, a colleague of mine, Dr. Kim Day, is also going to be introducing Dr. Dooley and giving us some more information from there. So with that, we're so excited to have you. We appreciate everyone's patience as we all navigate this online world. And I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Hoeft.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't see other people's faces for a moment. Good morning and good evening, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. It's such a great pleasure to see so many people interested in this topic and sharing the evening today. I hope it'll be a lively kind of chat and other discussions over the next 2 hours. So I am going to get started and talk mainly about the science and brain sciences of early identification. And I know Margie is going to emphasize a lot of the important pieces from here that's very relevant to our current day, everyday practice using some of these evidence-based information. So I will get started. I have a lot of information I'd love to share. But you will get all these slides later on, and there'll be a recording. So please don't worry if you miss copying anything. Just sit back and we will share these slides with you. And thank you very much for the kind introduction. I always want to acknowledge our supporters in various forms and shapes for supporting our work over the past couple of decades. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do any of it or have anything to share tonight. So thank you very much. Please visit our website, brainlens.org. And also you will see all the investigators and researchers that have been collaborating on these projects. But I'll try to emphasize and put a picture of their faces and their names as we go through some of the work. So I want to start here. Always I like to put 1 or 2 pictures of my children as examples. The great thing is that they're very different, and one has reading problems and the other one is a precocious reader. I don't need to get parental consent because I can give the consent and show their pictures. The only problem is during COVID, they are mostly around. And so it's very difficult and I have to hide when I'm presenting pictures of my children or they'll get very angry. But today they're not around, so I can freely talk about them, but I'll try to be brief. So here I want to emphasize the importance of looking at reading related information as well as language, which is sort of the theme of our of this talk today, but also I want to emphasize the research-based measures that are coming in and you will be seeing hopefully over the next decade, and the importance of taking a whole child approach. So this is one of my children. He's now 12. He was back probably 9 or 8 years old back then. His nickname in preschool was Information Seeker. So on a train, he's about 7, 8, 9 maybe years old. We get on a train, he forgets a book and he'll pick up adult magazines, newspapers from the floor and read cover to cover. And if you say that something is 10%, he would correct me and say, no, it's not 10%. And I would say, what is it? He would say, no, it's actually 9.75%. And he's very, very precise to his detriment in a way, but he has great qualities. He's good at reading. And so some people might say he's not as empathic as one should be at his age. The other one, Kaito, he's now 10 years of age. His nickname in preschool and to this day is Storyman. He loves to tell stories, especially if he knows he can get out of English language and art classes. This is a picture of him at nighttime. He would always charm his brother in, and he would have the lowest assistive technology that usually never runs out of battery because he loves reading. And all he has to do is charm his brother, hop on his back, and he'll get his evening reading in. He has a lot of, even though he doesn't like reading and writing, he hates it. He's gotten better at it now, but he would But he has a lot of other great qualities. For example, he loves to make things and create things, and he loves telling stories, and he's very empathic. So very different people, and we want to be able to capture all these children, and we're focused here on reading, but if they're not very strong in social emotional or executive or other functions, then we want to be able to bring make all our children, or let all our children thrive and succeed. So that's sort of our central theme around our research. So the outline of my talk is, we'll talk about mostly about the science, the importance of early identification and intervention of dyslexia risk. We'll talk about reading related measures that are important. I might quickly gloss over it more than you would like to, but Margie is going to talk extensively about these measures and apply to educational practice. I'll emphasize a little bit more than we should probably on the cognitive measures and how they could be important. I'll talk about family history measures that might allow us to identify risk much earlier on than we are currently doing, as well as the importance of some other measures as time permits. And then I will summarize. In terms of relevant efforts and opportunities for families and educators, we'll talk about it in the after Margie's talk in 5 or 10 minutes. So first I'll start by talking about the importance of early identification and intervention of dyslexia risk. So children, whether they have environmental risk factors or, for example, growing up in poverty or not having, or not speaking English in the household growing up, or whether they have biological risks from risk genes and so on, that may be, make some children vulnerable for developing dyslexia. Many of them will develop poor reading, and they may have poor outcomes such as poor educational attainment, poor psychosocial adjustments, poor health, and low income that impacts their future generations. And so we really want to stop this downward spiral. What we're focused on in our research is on early identification and preventive interventions or prevention. And also the second component of our research that we really emphasize is on accurate characterizations for their risks as well as protective factors, weakness as well as relative strengths, and then so that we can provide appropriate science-based remediation as well as promote resilience and compensation. But our main focus is on the top box today. Stopping this downward spiral is not only important, but also possible. We know that early intervention is 4 times more effective than regular classroom practice if you can, and this is statistics from pre-K and kindergarten. We also know that for each year that we wait, the effectiveness diminishes by 25 to 50%. So from pre-K to kindergarten, kindergarten to first grade to second grade, and it goes on and on. It doesn't mean that we can't intervene with children with evidence-based practice, we can. It just means that we need to provide more intensive and focus and kind of multiple different kinds of approaches to address their reading difficulties. Return on investment is high. For every dollar we spend, there's about $16 to $31 in return, depending on the British government statistics from a while ago, but this is the best statistics that I've seen so far. And also risk prediction is with the latest science, risk prediction can be done with 60 to 80% accuracy. Some people have come up with 92% accuracy, and it depends on the combination of measures, the algorithms used, and so on. And we know that the solution for dyslexia is not anything that's esoteric. It works for everyone. So if we can provide it in a very in a scalable way, it is effective for all children, and there's no reason why we should withhold this. So this shows the critical importance of science-based identification and preventive intervention at the earliest stage. So moving on into reading-related measures. So we have known for decades now of the importance of early identification, and I will present you with some brain evidence and what the best combination of predictors to date are. So we've done a number of research as well as for a number of years, some research on looking at brains of individuals with dyslexia, as well as pre-readers at risk for dyslexia, and many other groups have done this as well. People have shown over and over again that so this is the left side of the brain, The left side is the frontal part of the brain. The right side is the back of the brain. This is the top and the bottom is the bottom. So you're looking at primarily the left hemisphere. You're using both hemispheres when you're doing all different functions of the brain and learning processes. But often we focus on the left hemisphere because that's where it's most prominent. Above the ear and a little bit to the back is what's known as the temporoparietal region. I call this the first hotspot or the major hotspot. It's known to be important for phonological processing, the sound processing the sound units of words, as well as linking graphemes to phonemes, so the visual aspects and the sound aspects of words. The occipital temporal region is more on the back and the bottom of the brain, known as the orthographic region or the occipital temporal region. This is important for processing words and letters, and it's the key hub where a lot of the information comes in first as visual word forms, and then is sent to the meaning, the semantic route, which is more on the bottom of the brain, and then more of the phonological, the sound route, and combining it with letters, which runs through the top of the brain, known as the dorsal part. There's a lot of words that people use as brain scientists, and it took me about probably 3 to 6 months just to get all these nomenclature right when I first got into the field many, many years ago. What we have shown is that they will not grow out of it, meaning, and I don't want people to misunderstand this, I'm not saying that they will never intervene or the brains are not plastic and they won't change. What I mean is that it's not just simply a maturational delay. So you can't say, oh, that you will grow out of it, and so let's wait and see. That is not the solution, because what we've seen is that when you compare them to children that are younger who are not dyslexic. So for example, if you take an 8-year-old non-dyslexic child and take someone who reads like an 8-year-old, they might be 10 or 11 years old and they have dyslexia, their brains look different. They're just dyslexic individuals will have very characteristic dyslexia-like patterns in their brain, and typical readers who are younger are going to have more typical brain development. So it's not about brain maturational delay, and that's what I want to emphasize here. Also, the definition doesn't matter in a way. Historically, there's been a number of different ways to identify individuals with dyslexia, but in a way, many of these point to a similar kind of brain basis in these temporoparietal and occipital temporal regions. And also what we've shown is that even if you look at good readers, so you take someone who's reading at grade level, but they might have very high cognitive abilities. There's been split in the literature. So some professionals, half the professionals will say they have dyslexia because they're disproportionately weaker, even though their reading might be within grade level. And then some people say, no, that's the to have problem, that they are it's a rich person's problem. They are reading at grade level, so they don't have dyslexia and they should move on. And what we've done is we looked at those individuals' brains, and what we found is that they do show dyslexia-like patterns. So if there's any ways that they show dyslexia-like symptoms, even if they're reading at grade level, even if they're reading below grade level, even if they're disproportionate, not disproportionate, they do need to be provided services. And we've also shown, and a number of other groups have shown, that it's neurobiological in origin, and it's not cultural, that there's fundamental brain atypicalities or differences that we see not just in English dyslexics, and you see this in individuals in China with dyslexia and so on. Even though some people might say Chinese languages don't use these phonetics, kind of these rules and phonological processing as much as English, we still see these kind of weaknesses in these regions that we're showing here. Also predicts reading acquisition. So for example, if you look at the brains in pre-readers, if they're at risk, they're going to show weaknesses already before they're reading, and also that's going to predict outcome. So that's another reason why we don't want to wait to let our children fail. I guess I said this in different ways, that at-risk pre-readers already show the sign when they are at risk. But we have to be careful that this often is, when you read these things, it's often at the group level, and there's large individual variability. If you look at a student, it's almost impossible to find a very textbook-like characteristic pattern, and every child is very different, and so are their brains. So it's not a crystal ball that you can just look at their brain scans and identify on an individual basis, at least currently. This pattern that we're seeing here, and I'm just adding these white matter fibers that represents, the orange represents the phonological system, the green part represents more of the lexical semantic system, the network that's important in the brain. And the brain imaging evidence that I've shown here is very parallel to other information. So you may have heard of the simple view of reading, where reading, in order to become a good reading or skilled at reading and reading comprehender, then you need the background knowledge and oral language skills, and you also need decoding skills. And individuals with dyslexia, when they have decoding based problems, they often have more of these word recognition, and it corresponds nicely with their brain systems. It also corresponds nicely with the computational model. So this is, for example, the triangle model of reading. Mark Seidenberg and others have made this famous, and a lot of other computational scientists are studying this, and it shows a very similar pattern. So what I'm just trying to show here is that brain imaging data, simple view of reading, computational models all show conversion evidence. I said this already, and this is just a visual graphics of this. If you take individuals at high risk, for example, if they have a family member, close family member, parent, siblings with dyslexia, even if they're pre-readers compared to their low risk peers where they don't have family history, their size of the balls in the left side of the brain looks quite different already, even before they're learning to read. So you can see that they're smaller, which means that their connections are weaker, and this brain networks that supports reading is already weak, even at this stage, which supports the fact that we should be able to identify and support these children early on. And this is just a meta-analysis, meaning that we combine all these different research from Nadine Gabb's group, European groups, and so on. And we look at this and we see converging evidence that loads or kind of converges onto these phonological and orthographic brain systems. This is just a depiction to show that there might be some part of the brain networks that are more impacted by nature and some that are more impacted by nurture. And this may suggest, and this is still in the research phase, and we're not able to use this information to say that, oh, for this child, we should target this system because it's more nurture driven, it's more modifiable. But this is to give you a flavor of the kind of research that we're doing. We scan everyone in the family. Parents often don't like to be scanned, but they do tolerate, or the children love bringing their parents in and training their parents to have them stay still inside the scanner. So we've successfully brought a number of parents into the scanner, and then also go through the neuropsychological assessments of the children experience. When we look at the parents and children, we can apply some of these genetic algorithms and say, what is the coupling between parents' brain and behavior? And how is that related to their children? And if we look at this phonological and orthographic brain system, we can find something like this. So the phonological system is more driven by blue, that means it's G driven, so it's genetically driven. And then the orthographic system is more environmentally driven, even though it's much closer. And this is just preliminary data, but this shows potentially that perhaps it's always a good idea to train on the phonological and decoding systems, but also additionally, we might be able to target some of these modifiable systems, such as lexical, semantic, morphological processing, and other kinds of processes, in addition to some of the more traditional evidence-based practices. And this is also consistent with the older literature that suggests that phonological processing is more heritable, that gets passed on from the parents, and then orthographic processing is less heritable. And then, so reading-related measures predict dyslexia risk. This has been known for decades, and Margie, again, is going to emphasize a lot of these pieces. But risk can be identified in preschool to kindergarten children with 50 to 70% accuracy, and sometimes up to 92% accuracy. It's a combination of phonological awareness, as well as letter knowledge, letter sound knowledge, rapid naming, and vocabulary and oral language skills. And hopefully Margie can elaborate on this later on. Risk can also be identified in first grade with 92%. This is the number that I've been using. This is work done by Florida State University's Rick Wagner's group. He also presented this at the now 2018 IDA Orton lecture, and he has a publication on this in 2019. But what he proposed is that using some Bayesian kind of fancy statistical models, if you combine ADHD, gender, family history information, and low scores on some of these familiar measures, such as non-word fluency, oral reading fluency, response to intervention, and listening comprehension to reading comprehension differences, then you will be able to predict with very high accuracy. I don't want the male to stand out too much. It doesn't mean that males are necessarily more at risk. I mean, they are in a way. What people have said in the old days is that there's a lot more boys than girls with dyslexia. The latest evidence is that there's not that much. If you look at everyone, the whole distribution, it's not that different between boys and girls. Maybe it's 1.3 to 1 ratio. What's different here is that if you look at the most severe kids, then there's more boys than girls who have dyslexia. And so the male distribution, boy distribution is much wider. People don't know exactly why, but that is what the latest research suggests. So to summarize the section, there are brain signatures for early reading and dyslexia risk, even though it's varied from individual to individual, and we are applying machine learning, AI, and these kind of techniques to try to be able to help support identify kids early on a one-on-one basis. But right now, the latest, the current practice, best practice is simple measures such as the ones that I mentioned already: phonological awareness, letter knowledge, rapid naming, and oral language vocabulary, as well as some of these comprehension discrepancy measures. Response to intervention may predict outcome with very high accuracy. And this means that we should identify risk, be able to identify risk much earlier on. One thing to note is that in the old days, we used to hear that phonological awareness is the single and the only deficit that leads to dyslexia. That is not as true as we once thought. Maybe there's about half to 2/3 of the individuals will have phonological awareness deficits, and it is still the biggest risk factor in a way, but letter sound knowledge, especially when they get into kindergarten, is much more important. And also there's other factors as well. So it's multifactorial. And the ones that I've covered already are other measures that are very important. So moving on into the next piece on cognitive measures. So many of us in the reading field think that cognitive measures that predict reading outcome are reading and language specific. So for example, you may have heard that verbal short-term memory or verbal short-term memory, working memory might be important and significant predictor of reading outcome, but you don't hear too much about other kinds of cognitive measures. Also, you hear that cognitive training is ineffective and controversial. For example, like the brain training programs, computerized memory training, and they have shown to be miserably unsuccessful, at least so far. So therefore, measures of cognitive outcome is a waste of time to measure, but we want to argue that it's may not be, and rather that the jury is still out. And I'll share some evidence behind this. So we talked about the dyslexia kind of major hotspots in the brain, but also if you look at this, there's other networks that are important as well. So for example, in addition to orthographic and phonological processing in yellow and pink, there's the cyan kind of semantic processing, the blue syntactic sentence processing, the green vocabulary kind of networks. And then also there's the red, the attention network, and the orange executive function or cognitive flexibility, memory sort of networks as well that are thought to be very important for reading. So one might be able to say that you critically need these reading related networks, but in addition, if you're weak in those, potentially you can strengthen other parts to supplement some of their weaknesses. So that's kind of our starting point. This is a summary of the literature. So if you look at executive function, it's usually considered as a combination of working memory, cognitive flexibility, so how much you can flexibly adjust your surrounding environment, and inhibitory control. When you have to inhibit your response, can you appropriately inhibit? And that has been associated with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In terms of predicting response to intervention, people have shown that executive function may not predict response to intervention. But in terms of predicting reading failure in kindergarten or younger ages, it has been quite successful. So this is a couple of studies that have been done in 11,000 children. What people have found, researchers have found, is that kindergarten children with more working memory problems experience 2.8 times higher risk in grade 3, higher risk for reading failure in grade 3. And inhibitory control also, the deficits in that experience almost 2 times higher risk. And then all of these measures, working memory, flexibility, and inhibition, predict outcomes uniquely. So they are additive. And so you can't just measure one and say, I'm going to use that as a proxy for executive function. These seems to have additive effects in predicting outcome. So that's a quite large scale study. Some people have shown this is a meta-analysis, again, aggregating a number of different 75 studies that have been done in the past. What's known as cool inhibitory control measures, inhibition measures that are cool, meaning that they're not giving extrinsic motivators to keep them going. And this, when it's rated by teachers, is quite predictive in predicting reading outcomes. Also, supporting those when you want to support children who are weak in reading, but also weak in executive function also. This is another major study that have been done and suggested that if you have working memory or attention problems, it predicts reading outcome, but also it predicts much more oral comprehension, so language understanding problems or skills, even more so than reading. So what that means is that if they have executive function weakness, in addition to reading problems, maybe just saying that we're going to give all the instructions by oral language so they don't have to read may not be the issue. So materials delivered orally may not always help these children. So that's kind of another reason why we might want to measure executive function. So it might give us some strategies in supporting our children. This is another brain study, but we're interested in looking at resilient readers. And resilient readers are defined as good comprehenders, reading comprehenders despite poor decoding. So if you look at this figure here, the ones in orange, resilient readers are poor at decoding, good at reading comprehension, so they are resilient. The difference is large. The typical readers are good at decoding, good at comprehension, so you might not necessarily call them resilient readers. And generally poor readers might be poor at decoding, but poor at reading comprehension as well. So they're also not resilient. So we compare these three groups to see what's special in these resilient readers. So if they're poor at decoding, how can we find ways and what's the brain signature behind these good reading comprehenders who succeed despite struggling to decode? And here's what we found. The major part that was thought to be important is this prefrontal cortex, especially in the right hemisphere, but both hemispheres. And what this means is, and it's connected to the back of the brain, it's known as a frontoparietal network. It's not very important here, but what this part of the brain is important for is it's related to learning, memory, and cognitive flexibility. Again, executive function measure. So this also, and what we also found was this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex of pre-readers, so even at a young age, predicts later resilient readers and how resilient they become. So this critically shows the importance of some of these executive function type measures and brain networks in raising resilient readers. And we've also done a combination of looking at a number of all the past literature to see who are actually have risks, but going to end up being have no dyslexia. So they might have a family history, they might grow up in impoverished environments, but not have as much of a reading problem or not develop dyslexia. Also, we can look at individuals who have dyslexia but have positive outcomes, meaning they might be social, emotionally well-adjusted, good reading comprehension. And we try to identify these cognitive protective factors. You can see here that executive function does show up here, as well as language skills and others. So I just want to emphasize again that this shows up in the literature over and over again. And there's a number of social emotional factors. You will have these slides, but that's not the main focus of our conversation today. So I'm going to skip this part except for just flash it so you can look at it later or ask me questions. So the other piece of evidence is reading interventions. When you do reading interventions, often brain researchers will say, well, their brain normalizes, meaning that their phonological and orthographic systems seem to become more stronger. But what is the evidence behind this? So we looked at Lori Cutting's meta-analysis of the brain. So a combination of all the past intervention studies that have been done. They did a nice summary of this. But what you see here is the lack of hotspots in this phonological and orthographic regions, meaning that it's not as normalizing as one we thought. If you combine and statistically and quantitatively, objectively look at these brains and how they change with intervention. So what are the other kind of hotspots that are showing up? So we did some analysis of these regions and what these regions mean. And even though they might not be the hotspot, they seem to be involved in language and word, sentence, phonological, orthographic processing. These are yellow and orange measures, but we also critically see a lot of these cognitive key terms that shows up, which is another evidence behind this whole cognitive measure thing, that where we're suggesting that cognitive measures might be more important than we once thought. Also turning to ADHD, we know that a lot of parents are concerned about ADHD because it's highly comorbid, especially that attention deficit subtype. So we wanted to see what the evidence is behind this. So ADHD, as I said earlier, and also older evidence suggests that it increases the chance of having dyslexia by 4-fold. Also, as I said earlier, Rick Wagner's research from Florida State suggests that a combination, including ADHD measures, will increase the likelihood that we can identify risk much earlier and early on. And then also having ADHD comorbidity predicts poor response to intervention, reading intervention in young children. So these are all the important reasons why we want to pay attention to attention and other kind of cognitive measures. And when there are ADHD symptoms, the current evidence suggests that it's important to treat them independently. So don't do just reading interventions and wait to see if the attention goes away. Focus on the attention symptoms as well. And turning to interventions related to cognition, as I said earlier, brain training programs are very controversial in improving executive function or reading abilities. There's been probably hardly any studies, especially these summary studies, meta-analysis, that have shown that it's effective. So cognitive, for example, have been shown, unfortunately, to have near zero effect, at least looking at all the past research. 51% shows far transfer, but there's very few independent studies. And then also it doesn't translate to reading. It might transfer to other executive function measures, but not all the way to reading. But there are other kinds of training measures that might improve executive function as well. So some people have shown, this is a study combining 90 studies done recently, especially in children with special needs, self-regulation studies, strategies, including biofeedback, enhanced relaxation, and strategy teaching programs seems to be effective. And then in typical readers, mindfulness practice and computerized training of executive function in these typical readers could be effective, at least according to this study. Some well-known executive function researchers have said that it's important to address emotional, social, and physical needs in order to improve executive function and reading outcome as well. And then some people have said that musical training might improve kind of reading-related measures, but also through executive function. But this is the jury's still out. But in terms of more things that are related to reading and grounded of reading, something that's directly related to reading, but related to executive function as well, such as reading strategies, might improve reading the best. So setting reading goals in whole classroom settings have been known to be most effective, especially in younger grades. And unfortunately, there's not many studies that have been done in younger grades. And there's some strategy kind of studies that have been done in younger grades where it's stop and think, oral correction strategies seem to be important, but this is not a large scale study, so a lot more research needs to be done. Just kind of getting closer to the end, I know, but the last piece I wanted to say is not just trashing video games and because I know we've talked about all these controversies surrounding this, but there is some studies that have shown that multitasking video games can improve focus, especially in ADHD. And we talked already about targeting ADHD if they have comorbidity, in addition to reading is important. So for example, there's been a large kind of research study that shows that if you just focus on overall action video games. I know it could be potentially controversial. I'm happy to take questions later on, but it has shown to improve thinking skills. For example, if you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation, Sesame Street, PBS are good for young kids. So this is more about electronic use in general, that it could be used in a wise way. And then the one that I really wanted to emphasize here is the first FDA-approved prescribable video games for inattention in ADHD has been approved this past year. And this is in older kids in ages 8 to 12, but it has been approved and it's out there. There's a number of great research in Nature and Lancet that has been published that shows that they're not recommending it as first line of interventions, but if it's combined with medication, if it's used as a supplement, it could be potentially powerful. So to summarize this section, each executive function measure provides unique contributions to working memory, cognitive flexibility, inhibition, and also predicts reading outcome, and those with deficits may be at risk. Some may be important in predicting response to intervention and positive reading outcome. And there may be no bullet point proof interventions, but then those that include reading strategies, those that include self-regulation strategies, and those that target ADHD focused video games have been shown to be effective for reading, executive function, or attentions. And then just the final piece is on family history, and I'll try to run through this very quickly, but we know for a long time that dyslexia seems to run in families. Risk is 4 to 8 times higher than general population risk. And if you have a close family member, 1 in 2 to 3 will develop dyslexia. So there's some neural evidence. I talked about this already, looking at high risk pre-readers. So I won't repeat this and skip over it, but there is neural evidence. And what is the best way to capture family history? So I'll just focus on this piece at the to conclude. So we talked about this already. I showed this kind of meta-analysis or combined research study. So there's a number of research studies that shows that there's a brain basis underlying family risk. So we want to be able to identify kids earlier on than before we wait and fail our children. We also know that this, the parental impact on dyslexia, some might say, well, it's the environment because the parents don't like reading, or maybe they were drinking too much, or there's some other kinds of family environmental measures, as well as some other kind of more biological risk factors. But currently the research suggests that it's primarily genetics and it's inherited, even though it doesn't completely explain everything, at least with the latest science. What we want to show here is that we developed and validated the 6-item questionnaire that is useful if you're an adult and never been identified, but you want to find out that you may have had dyslexia. Sometimes adults find out because the kids were identified with dyslexia, but you might want to find out yourself, or you might be in college and want to find out. This could be a useful screener. It's we've reduced it from 20-something questions to 6 measures to show that it's equally as effective, at least in our validation studies. You can also use it if you're a parent and want to find out if your pre-reading child or young child may be at risk for dyslexia. So if the parent has dyslexia because your child is at risk for having being a struggling reader later on. So I have all the instructions. I'm happy to share them to you. If you contact us at this email address, we'll be happy to send all the materials, including how to administer it and the science behind this. So to summarize, it's the family history is primarily genetic. Parents' childhood reading history, so their history predicts parent reading, but also child's reading and risk for developing dyslexia and poor reading. And their child's reading and phonological component is best predicted by family history. And the 6 simple questionnaires we're advocating for is as good as the full questionnaire. And some states, for example, Connecticut is trying to push right now to pass it through the dyslexia legislation, the bill that's in right now, to include some of these as an earliest screener before we can get the children to be screened using some of these behavioral measures. There's other measures that I'm not covering here, for example, social emotional factors, socioeconomic status, English learner status, home literacy, they're all very important. Perinatal environment, for example, maternal substance use has an impact on cognitive outcome as well as reading outcome. And there's a lot of other factors to consider this as well in terms of impacting their poor reading outcome. So to finally summarize, early identification and intervention is important and possible. Reading-related measures are strong predictors, including oral language measures, and cognitive measures are also predictive in literacy outcome and can add to identifying risk. Family history is very important and can be measured very easily. And other measures can add to the risk, even though I didn't have time to go into details, but they also can be protective measures as well. So this is just the really old model, the phonological single deficit model has moved on to capture that there's multiple factors that are important in its liability for just developing risk and dyslexia, but also the newest model suggests that there's cumulative risk and protection that's important. Also known as CRAP, and I won't spell it out, but basically that there's neurobiological and environmental risk and protective factors that we can also use to our advantage to help support our children. That's it from me. So can we help our children succeed? Yes, I believe we can. And this is just, I just want to show one slide how our poor reader is doing at home right now, a couple years later. He still doesn't like reading, but he was very motivated to write notes while I was giving a talk 2 years ago. And this is the note, when you're motivated, you can do this. And this is the notes he gave me after my talk, that I droned too much, I was too quiet. I said, too much. I didn't use hands gestures too much, and I sounded bored with only a hint of enthusiasm. So if I was able to convince you with some, if I had showed some enthusiasm, if you notice me using some gestures, if you see my son, you can let him know when you see him. Thank you very much. I apologize, I went quite over.
All right. Thank you, Fumiko. Thank you for doing a great job presenting the science of early identification. And I am going to follow with the practical application, not about all of the things that Fumiko spoke about, but some of them. And I want to just for a moment tell you a little bit about Literacy How. We believe that literacy is the key to opportunity, and therefore children are at the heart of all that we do, because we believe that every child has the right to read. And we know that 95% can be taught to read. We believe that teachers, not programs, teach the children to read, write, and spell. So we empower teachers with knowledge. And so my outline for this evening, or this afternoon or this morning, depending on your time zone. First, I'm going to explain just briefly why we believe teachers require coaching support to apply the science of reading. I also am going to share a little bit about the Early Language and Literacy Initiative. It's an approach that is used in a number of preschools in Connecticut, and how it provides early intervention for students at risk for reading difficulties, including dyslexia. I also want to describe the relationship between invented writing, invented spelling, and the alphabetic principle, and why that's really important to prepare children for success in school, kindergarten and beyond. And I also want to share some activities for practitioners who are joining us today. So some activities that you can use to support children's language and literacy skill development. And just to provide some context, I've already said that 95% of children can be taught to read. So that's our bar, that's our benchmark that we have to shoot for. And we have to really work hard, because 65% of our nation's fourth graders are reading below grade level. In some urban settings, it's as high as 85% reading below grade level. And one of the reasons, or one of the major reasons that we believe this is the case, is because teachers are typically not taught how to teach reading. And we know that teaching reading is rocket science, according to Louisa Moats and many others. The good news is that teacher knowledge of effective literacy instruction actually and strategies associated with that can override student disadvantages. So it's really important that we work hard to provide professional development for teachers to teach this application of the science of the evidence-based practices. And I want to show you this slide because I want to talk for a moment about professional development. That's the work that I and my mentor team do with teachers, and we provide coaching support. So if you look at this first column, we have elements of professional development that include teaching teachers about theory, doing some demonstration within the context of a PD, providing some practice opportunities for participants in the PD, but the coaching is usually outside of the professional development. And what you can see here is that we're looking for teachers to attain a level of knowledge as well as skill attainment. So it's not just the theory, but you have to know how to apply it and what those skills are associated with the theory. And then last but not least, what do we want to see happen in the classroom? So that transfer to practice and knowing that the teacher is using these activities, these strategies, these methods routinely is what we're after. And we don't get to 99% transfer until we factor in coaching. So the theory, the demonstration, the practice, you see that there's very little transfer to practice until you give the teachers embedded support in their classroom to see what it looks like. So what I'd like to do is just share some of what it looks like. So our model for early intervention is to ensure that any child who's identified at risk for learning and reading difficulties will receive the intervention and / instruction they need to be successful. How do we do that? Well, Fumiko talked about screening, right? So using data from a reliable and valid early literacy screening assessment so that we use those data to select appropriate evidence-based practices and supports. And what is it that we have to do to get teachers comfortable with that? Again, we have to provide a lot of job embedded, meaning classroom embedded support. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit about the Early Language and Literacy Development Initiative, which is affectionately called ELLI. ELLI started in 2012 in a children's museum in Norwalk, Connecticut, Stepping Stones Museum for Children. And Rhonda Keese, the executive director, who has spent her whole career in children's museums, and I teamed up to think about what would a very evidence-based, intentionally designed learning experience that infuses both language and literacy into its environments, what would that look like? And the point of this initiative was to talk about and try to reduce the opportunity and achievement gap that we see all over the country, now more than ever. And so this unique partnership between an educator, myself, who's been in the field for many, many years, and a children's museum director created ELLI, which I'll share some pictures and more information about. So what makes ELLI unique? So this is a preschool initiative. Actually, now we have children starting at age 18 months and all the way up through age 5. And we're creating what we call language-rich environments, which I'll describe to support both early language and literacy development. All of the work that we're doing in these classrooms, all of our methods of instruction are evidence-based, and all our lessons have a language objective as well as a literacy objective. Very collaborative environment where teachers have been given a lot of time to prepare. That's not the norm in preschool. In K-12 education, teachers usually have prep time built into their schedule. And I will admit, and all teachers will tell you, they never have enough time for prep. But in early childhood classrooms, It's very rare that the teachers are given time outside of the classroom to collaborate with one another, to plan, and to thoughtfully think through what their instruction will look like. So Literacy How Mentor has supported this work since 2012. And what also makes ELLA unique is it's really data-driven instruction using a problem-solving approach to really differentiate. And again, in early childhood classrooms, you might see children in centers, you might see children in dramatic play and role playing and block corner, but you don't always see data driving the formation of small groups. And how do we do that? Well, about 7 years ago, we heard about the PELI, which is the Preschool Early Literacy Indicator. It's also referred to as the baby DIBELS. And in Norwalk at the time, we were using the DIBELS, the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, developed at the University of Oregon. And so in an effort to have a screener that actually was looking at children before they got to kindergarten, the PELI was developed. It is a storybook embedded assessment of essential pre-literacy and oral language skills that are needed for kindergarten. And they're designed to identify children who are experiencing difficulties acquiring these skills before they even get to kindergarten. It's administered to preschool and pre-K students, and it measures 4 things: alphabet knowledge, vocabulary and oral language, phonological awareness, and listening comprehension. Again, the child is interacting with an assessor. Usually it's the teacher who's purportedly reading a storybook to the child, but is actually gathering important data on these early literacy and language skills. And so what are we talking about here? Well, we really are wanting our pre-K teachers, and of course beyond pre-K and to K, to think about children's response to intervention or instruction. If we're using really good instruction, if we're taking the research seriously and we're applying it in classrooms, children who don't respond as well to that, that's a red flag. And Fumiko talked a little bit about that earlier. RTI, by the way, is often used synonymously with MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of response, really support. They're not exactly the same thing, but the concept is similar. So in order to have this kind of system in place, we have to have and begin with a universal screener. And we also have to monitor kids' progress in between the benchmark periods. The PELI is administered the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year. You don't want to wait 8 or 12 weeks to administer the next assessment to see if the child is responding to the intervention. We have to monitor their progress regularly. And we use the data to make decisions. So our instructional decisions about how children are grouped and how children are interacted with are based on data. And there's implementation fidelity that we also want to take into account. That's very important when we're applying RTI, using evidence-based interventions. So I took a screenshot of a pre-K data meeting process here using the PELI. And if some of you are familiar with the DIBELS, you know that you get green, yellow, and red to indicate some risk, or rather no risk, or little risk, some risk, and a lot of risk. And so we have teachers regularly looking at their class overview, their benchmark scores, and then cutting them up and basically placing children into groups based on what their data is telling them. So we have a phonemic awareness group, a phonological awareness group at a lower level, a higher level. We have a group that is formed based on letter ID scores, and a group that's formed based on comprehension and oral language and vocabulary scores. So we're not using just one score to demonstrate risk. We're looking at the various assessment subtests to determine risk in 4 areas. Now, I want to just take a minute to describe kind of the the big ideas that we focus on in our professional development. This is a reading wheel that we constructed to look at the big ideas that came out of the National Reading Panel. So we have phonemic awareness, phonics and spelling, and oral language that I'm going to talk about tonight. A little bit on vocabulary and comprehension, but these are the major areas that I'm going to focus on. And I always preface my discussion of literacy and language skills by talking just a moment about the simple view of reading, which you see here as depicted by LC, language or listening comprehension, times D, decoding, also written as word recognition here, equals RC, or reading comprehension. That's the simple view of reading, not to suggest that reading comprehension is simple. It is absolutely not, but just showing how those two components, language comprehension and decoding, are highly correlated. So this is, many of you have seen Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, and I think it does a nice job of capturing what goes into being good at language comprehension, including all of these skills listed here, and what goes into being good at word recognition or decoding. Now, I've adapted this a little bit in the next slide to show a pre-kindergarten literacy knowledge version of Hollis Scarborough's rope. And you'll just see that in the oral language comprehension domain, we're looking at print concepts, background knowledge, vocabulary, and language structures. And so we're learning about books and language through oral language experiences and reading aloud, dialogic reading, etc. And then the other side of that simple view equation is word recognition. Well, we're not teaching pre-K children to decode, but we're getting them ready so that they will learn how to decode and read words accurately and automatically through phonological awareness, activities, letter recognition, letter sound knowledge, so that they will in time discover the alphabetic principle and be ready to read when they get to formal school. And I do want to just take a moment to share the IDA definition of dyslexia, which has been in effect since 2004. It is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. And certainly Fumiko spent a lot of time discussing that and sharing that information with you. Characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition, also poor spelling and decoding abilities that are basically rooted in a core phonological deficit. And that is a component of language. So I want to really impress upon all of you that dyslexia is a language-based learning disability. I cannot say enough about the importance of focusing on language. This deficit is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities, and also the provision of effective classroom instruction. RTI doesn't work as a framework, as a method of ensuring that children are being identified as being at risk and then being followed just very diligently to make sure they're learning what they're being taught. Without that effective classroom instruction component. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension because our children with dyslexia don't like to read very much. And so the way that we acquire background knowledge and develop vocabulary skills and build our background knowledge is generally through reading. If children aren't reading, again, the secondary consequences are listed here, and something that we really need to pay attention to, in addition to the social emotional component and that Fumiko spoke about. So risk can be identified, as Fumiko shared a little bit ago, in preschool and kindergarten with 50 to 70% accuracy. She mentioned up to 92% accuracy when we're looking at phonological awareness, letter sound knowledge, rapid naming, and vocabulary and oral language. And so the importance of early reading intervention cannot be emphasized enough. When children do not receive adequate reading instruction, early reading difficulties will likely lead to later reading difficulties. And these reading difficulties can be reduced and even eliminated as a result of evidence-based instructional interventions, especially when they're provided early. This publication, this article was just published a couple months ago in the Reading League Journal. And the National Early Literacy Panel, so the National Reading Panel came out in 2000. In 2007, a panel of experts met to look specifically at early literacy and again, identified predictors of oral language, phonological processing, and print knowledge. They also spoke a lot about the targeted practices that are more likely to be effective than non-targeted practices. And that's really what I want to spend time talking a lot about this evening. And when many unrelated skills are targeted simultaneously, the learning outcomes are not as strong. So again, helping teachers understand that we can focus on one skill or in some cases, a set of interrelated skills, but not try to teach everything all at once, which oftentimes happens. So in the early language literacy initiative classrooms, the LE classrooms, are three things that we focus on. One is having classrooms that we consider complex learning environments. And I'll explain a little bit more about that, but complex learning environments are designed for children to learn high-level vocabulary and academic language. And this environment facilitates that language development. We also make sure that our teachers facilitate role playing. So children build vocabulary and background knowledge through this role playing, which I'll describe a little bit more. And invented writing is a very, very big part of the curriculum and the LE curriculum, because you'll see where invented writing actually gets children to that alphabetic principle quickly so that they are prepared and ready to learn to read. So the alphabetic principle is this understanding that letters are used to represent speech sounds and spoken words can be represented with letters. And they learn this alphabetic principle as they use invented writing in the classroom. So take a minute and see if you can figure out what these words say in children's invented spelling. So we have you, Y-O-U, why, while, went, once. I forget this one now, train, want, and thank you. It's really fun once you start to have children write what they're hearing and what they know about language and try to read their writing. Here's another child's writing. I made a TV astronaut. And of course, that was Lucas who wrote that. There are many benefits of developmental spelling. I won't read all of these bullets, but I think it's important to think about the attitudinal and linguistic readiness that we give children when they are creating and developing spelling skills. It's especially important for children who come to school with fewer literacy experiences, because some children who are at home in language-rich homes and their parents are writing and reading, they may imitate their parents and try to spend time doing that. Other children who do not have those language-rich experiences will not be having those exposures at home. This practice also develops phonemic awareness and phonetics relationship between spoken and written words. And this early composing is actually predictive of reading comprehension, as well as reading and spelling. So again, we have some invented spelling over here. You'd probably guess this is flower, this is vegetable, and this is hard. Now this child is pretty far along in knowing his letter sound correspondences. As you see here, that's part of one of the skills that's required to invent a spelling. Phonemic awareness inventing a spelling, you have to hear those sounds, and then you also have to know how print works. So I'm going to break that down for you in a moment. And in the course of the next 20 minutes or so that I have, I'd like to just talk about these pre-literacy skills and introduce you to some of the activities that we use in our classrooms with our children. So the 5 components of this early intervention that I'm going to speak about are these 5. And I'm going to start with phonological awareness. And I'm going to share this picture that helps our teachers understand that phonological awareness develops sequentially. So instruction has to target the appropriate level based on these informal assessments, these literacy screeners that Fumiko talked about. And this is a flow chart. I know it's got a lot of information on it, but as I said, we want our students to use data to determine what an instructional focus for a small group of children would be based on the data. And here's the alphabet knowledge, the oral language and vocabulary, comprehension, and phonological awareness. And we can see, as this chart shows, that we would expect 3 to 4-year-olds at that primary level or the basic level of phonological awareness, where they're listening to words that rhyme, they're clapping syllables, etc., before they move up to the higher levels of phonological and phonemic awareness. So they would be, again, at the syllable level, segmenting the word like rooster, clapping rooster, blending elephant, and manipulating sounds. Say playground, now say playground, but don't say play. Once they've gotten to good at level 3, and this is a game called Going on a Trip. So I'm going to pack my bag to take a trip, and I'm going to take my book has 1 clap. I'm going to take my toothbrush. I'm going to put the toothbrush in the suitcase with 2 dots, and I'm going to take my pajamas. So I would put the picture or the actual pajamas in the suitcase with the 3 dots. And when children are good at that level 3 and then up to level 2, we can bring them to level 1, where they're actually isolating the initial sound, then the final sound, then the medial sound. And again, we start with sorting pictures. This is all auditory, as you all know. Phonological awareness activities and games can be played with your eyes closed, although in this case, we're having children actually look at pictures and sorting words that begin with s and words that begin with mop and mice and sun and soap. And you'll notice that we chose and s. Those are easier to isolate. Those sounds are easier to isolate because they are continuant sounds. And once children master the initial sound sorting and isolating the initial sound, they can play an odd one out game. One of these things is not like the other. Sesame Street song. So we have drum, ham, gum, and mouse. Which one doesn't belong? The goal is to direct children's attention to the similarities in the sounds in words. Oh, I've lost my cursor. Where is it? And once children can do syllables and onset rhyme and initial sound isolation, final and medial, we can then have them say it and use say it and move it to segment the sounds in words. So the second component is print awareness, and print awareness, also referred to as book knowledge, is teaching children how print works. And that's a central goal that we have in preschool as well as in kindergarten. When children's experiences are limited, their lack of exposure puts them at risk. So we want to give them lots of opportunities to understand how print works. There's these concepts that we're focused on, recognizing print in the environment, et cetera, and then skills associated with with print awareness, as you see here. And just to show you an example of this, we have an activity called synchronized reading, again, focused on concepts of print. And you see my little niece Tate here, who's knows the rhyme, 1, 2, buckle my shoe, but she doesn't have the alphabetic principle yet. So she's not able to track exactly each word. And so, you know, we use this as a way to get children used to the idea of pointing to one word as they say it and the return sweep, etc. And this is my older granddaughter who has the alphabetic principle and is starting to read. And so she's actually arranging the sentences from the poem in order and cutting apart a sentence like this. And then she is assembling that sentence based on what she knows about sound symbol correspondences. What's the next? So the third thing that I'm going to share as a component to this pre-literacy work is learning the letter sound correspondences. And we know that one of the best predictors of first grade reading success is a kindergarten's ability to recognize the letters of the alphabet. And in fact, rapid naming, letters recognition is often used, letters and objects and numbers, but specifically we're looking here at letter recognition and the ability for a student to name those letters as quickly as possible. This also includes recognizing letters in both upper and lowercase forms. So in our LE classrooms, children start with their names, but they also know how to match the upper and lowercase, as you see in this picture. And why is this so important? Because when children can identify letters quickly and easily, they'll have more attention and capacity left to figure out and process the words. And this is evidence that the child has had lots of exposure to print and experience with books. I will tell you that when I was doing my dissertation at a preschool in Connecticut, this is going back a number of years ago now, there were 2 preschools in the same site, at the same site. One preschool classroom had letters everywhere and the other preschool classroom did not have letters anywhere in the classroom. And when I asked the teacher why, she said that that was something that kindergarten children learn, letter recognition and letter sound correspondence. And she was really focused more on getting kids to socialize and learn how to, you know, get along in a classroom, etc. And I think that's changed dramatically since then, but there was a time when preschool teachers did not believe in the importance and understand the importance of letter recognition. This is the alphabet chant. So instead of having the children sing the alphabet song, they chant A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q. Okay, so you get the idea. Instead of saying L, M, N, O, P, and kids get confused, they think that's 1 or 2 letters. We actually have them chant the alphabet. We also teach our little ones, our young ones, about sounds. And we wouldn't do this until probably kindergarten, but we are going to explain, we might not call them consonants and vowels, but we'll explain that the alphabet is comprised of letters and sounds. Some sounds are consonant sounds, some sounds are vowel sounds, and consonant sounds are formed with the lips, the tongue, and the teeth. And we teach our kids to be sound scientists. So they look at their mouths as they're producing sounds in a mirror. They are looking at, is the sound produced with their lips, the tongue, their teeth? Where does the air come from? They can tell if the air is coming out of their mouth or out of their nose. They also check their speech motor to see if it's on or off. So this is really important work, especially for children who are at risk with that phonological processing deficit. They have a lot of trouble processing those sounds, and this focus on the articulatory gestures really helps them become sensitive to those sounds. We have them singing the vowel song in pre-K and definitely in kindergarten. So at first they don't know what they're singing exactly, but at least they're understanding that vowels open your mouth, that there are 2 sounds for every vowel, and they know the key words for A and E and I and O and U. So A makes 2 sounds, A makes 2 sounds, A and A, etc. I love the vowel song. So the names of the letters are really related in some cases to letter sounds. And so teaching the letter sound correspondences and again, teaching letter names is powerful. You say the letter name for B, what sound do you hear at the beginning of that? B, you hear B. Now, not all letters work that way. If you think of the letter F, say F, you hear the F sound at the end of the name of the letter. Either way, children can discover many letter sounds themselves from the names of the letters. So that brings us to writing development. And writing development begins again by teaching young children the sound symbol correspondences, and we use see it, say it, and write it. It's an activity where we're teaching them the letter sound correspondences, the letter formation. So they see the letter, they know the letter formation, and we're focused not just on the kinesthetic development, but also by hand, but also by mouth. And that was supposed to be animated, but something happened to it. What young children do. So typically they like to play with writing and begin to move from imitating patterns to creating them. So this little boy's name is Henry. He left out his R, H-E-N-I, but we're basically creating those patterns first before they actually can mimic and imitate those patterns in writing. They begin by attending to print, especially the letters in their names. And as they go through this, they understand the alphabetic principle because the adults are intentionally modeling how print works at their level. And this is done through play, having children playfully explore how to use print, letting children construct their own knowledge of written expression, and discovering how to form the letters in their names. Now, I do want to take a moment and talk about handwriting. I cannot believe how many students I see now who look dysgraphic, and some of you have heard of dysgraphia, difficulty with writing that also involves orthographic understanding of how the words are spelled. But I do believe that a lot of this has to do with the fact that we don't explicitly teach handwriting. And we don't do that in kindergarten, first grade, and we certainly don't spend a lot of time in pre-K, which is really where it should start. Encouraging students to form the letters from the top to the bottom, moving from left to right, practicing letters in skywriting, so writing them vertically on whiteboards, as well as horizontally, and very importantly, paying attention to the child's grip so poor habits can be addressed. Once a child has established a grip, as many of you teachers know, it's very difficult to change that. So I encourage preschool teachers listening tonight to think about really building in some explicit time for handwriting instruction. It does not have to be didactic and drill and kill. We never want to kill anybody, right? Through drill, it's done in developmentally and appropriate and engaging ways. So I want to talk about invented writing and the benefits. Oh, I've already shown you this slide, so I can skip that one. Oh, what happened? I went backwards. Oh no, I know, sorry. I want to, now that I've talked a little bit about phonological awareness, letter sound knowledge, and rapid naming, I now want to take a few minutes that I have left to talk about vocabulary and oral language. So there are many ways to support language development. Here are a few. Using language building strategies, so having children label, describe, explain, compare, link. This one is very important, asking questions that build higher order thinking skills. Also scaffolding language of instruction in children's responses to help them complete a task successfully. This is especially important for children whose expressive language skills may not be typically developing because they have had some speech and language difficulties, because they're English learners. There are many reasons for this, but scaffolding the language of instruction and, as I said, preparing children for success with expressive language is also very important. And then extending language through conversations that introduce new vocabulary and extend, as I say, rich children's language throughout the day. And so this focus on language and helping children understand their world is an important part of the LE classroom. Teachers actually plan role play experiences in these immersive classroom environments. This is called a small world. So you have a teacher here with just a few children, and the children are role playing what they're learning about in the classroom. And the children are oftentimes the more knowledgeable other. When they get excited about learning about something, they want to teach their friends about it and their teachers. And children often help create this learning environment by co-constructing, working collaboratively to solve a problem or clarify a concept. Both parties in the task think and talk together. This is a shared thinking kind of experience. And we just had a research meeting for LE this morning, and one of our research partners from Ohio State did her dissertation on the work that we're doing in these classrooms and focusing on meaning-based instruction and this whole idea of facilitating rich language and vocabulary development. Very exciting stuff. So again, I just read this article today, actually, by Kelly et al. It was published in 2020 in the Journal of Speech and Language. And this was an intervention that included exposing preschool children to pre-recorded storybooks to address vocabulary learning. And in the treatment classrooms, when they heard these pre-recorded storybooks and the teachers followed that audiobook with explicit vocabulary instruction, they actually outperformed statistically significantly better than the children in the control classrooms. So vocabulary is a huge part of this oral language component. And it's exciting to be able to think about how we can build rich vocabulary instruction into our preschool classrooms and beyond. And on that note, I believe I came up just on, I hope anyway, on my time frame. I thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
So should I go back and talk a couple of minutes? I think.
Please do. Yes. Thank you, Margie. That was fantastic. And Fumiko,
Yes.
please. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. So thank you, Margie. That was fantastically very helpful, and I always learn when I listen to you. So thank you very much. I want to spend a couple minutes just showing you a quick demo. I think I decided that it might be easiest if I show you a little video clip that we created, and then supplement that with a couple slides. So hopefully it won't take more than 4 to 5 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes. So I'm going to share the screen. Apologize, I have multiple screens open, so it's, let me see. I am going to share. I'm going to share this whole desktop. That's okay, and hopefully it's going to work. So I'll start with this short video that we created relatively recently. It was still pre-COVID, a combination of pre-COVID, but let's see. If you can't hear anything, it's just music in the background. If you can't hear it, let me know. I heard or I saw a chat comment saying that it was a little choppy. I apologize. I have some other demos, but I'm not sure if it's going to improve by showing it through PowerPoint. So I'm just going to supplement that with a couple slides and finish off, but I'm happy to take any questions later. So a prize is meant to be a fun universal screener that assesses language and literacy and cognition in young learners of ages 4 to 8 in the form of an app. It's not meant as a diagnosis, it's meant as a universal screener. It is meant to be free for all educators, parents, and pediatricians, and we're currently validating our product for future release. We have a number of partners listed here from UCSF funders such as CZI and Schwab Foundation to UConn, MIT, and now Florida State University. Yakov Pecher and Katz are collaborating or starting to collaborate with us. That would really revamp the language and literacy piece. There's a lot of things that are moving pieces. So even the name might change and other pieces might change, but this is where we are at right now. It's meant to be for every young child. We talked about this already. So I think this is all not new. It was in that previous slide. There's currently 14 modules, but again, as I said, language and pre-literacy measures and literacy measures will be revamped. But I think what's unique compared to ours, compared to, for example, Nadine Gabbs from Boston Children's Hospital, and then Florida State also on its own with MIT are developing, but we're also joining efforts as well, is that there's a more focus on language and literacy measures than others. We also have an additional focus on executive function and cognition, which you may have guessed from my earlier talk. So currently assesses 14 domains that's listed here. I'm not going to go through them, but we did talk about it in my talks, and all those, including those that Margie mentioned, are here. We will be sharing the slides with you later. Recently, or relatively recently, California governor approved for pilot implementation across California. This was funded and it made decisions in 2019, but it's really just getting started with recently with an MOU with Florida State University and others. And so we will be quickly moving forward over the next couple of years. And as I said already, these are partners, including validation partners from various schools and districts from Connecticut, California, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Oklahoma. So thank you very much for our partnerships, and I hope many of you will join us in the near future. And I think that's it from me.
I want to thank Margie and also Fumiko. Really enjoyed your presentations. Lots of information, lots of things to think about. Both from Dr. Hoeft and also Dr. Gillis. And Dr. Gillis, thank you so much for helping us understand ways that we can apply the science that Fumiko was talking about. We're ready to turn to our Q&A portion of our webinar. I want to remind attendees that they can put any questions, if they haven't done so already, into our chat. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Caitlin Dooley, who's going to be joining Margie and Fumiko and also Josh Clark for the Q&A session. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Caitlin Dooley. Dr. Dooley is the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at the Georgia Department of Education and also a professor at the Georgia State University. Her research investigates digital literacies, emergent comprehension, literacy instruction and testing in elementary grades, as well as teacher development. Dr. Dooley has led and evaluated funded research totaling more than $285 million from the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Corporation for National and Community Service, and various private foundations. In addition to having taught preschool and elementary grades, Dr. Dooley has also served as a consultant in many school systems and schools across the country. Dr. Dooley received her doctorate from the University of Texas at Austin, and undergraduate and master's degrees from the University of Virginia. Tonight, what we'd like her to do is to give you a quick update on Senate Bill 48. As part of her role in the Department of Education, she has helped lead the implementation of Senate Bill 48. And so Dr. Dooley, go ahead and provide some information. And then if the other presenters will come on screen when Dr. Dooley is finished, Lisa Murray will lead us in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that gracious and opening and history of my work in literacy. I'm so lucky to be here, and we're so lucky to have these resources like this Schenck School here in Georgia, because it's such a great partner. I've been sort of watching the chats and recognizing some names. So for those of you who I've talked to before, thank you for being here, and I so appreciate you continuing to advocate for your children and for really all children in Georgia, and know that you know, I'm doing my best to advocate, as well as is our state school superintendent, Richard Woods. So I wanted to give you an update, and without burying the lead, the big update that I have is that today is Signed Eye, which is the final day of the legislature before they move on to budget. And they just finished the joint committees, and we have a new allocation in Georgia of over $1 million, which we have never had before, specifically for dyslexia services. It really is specifically for screeners, but as I'm learning about this new Apprise app, I'm thinking, how could we really leverage that? Because $1 million in the whole scheme of things is not a ton of money, but boy, I can do a lot with $1 million. So I'm really excited about that. And I know that that this is not my work. This is our work. This is the work of many of you who are watching this and learning more and just so invested in our students. And that's really what it's all about. I wanted to give you an update on last year's legislative session and what has happened since then. So last year, we're really in 2019, Senate Bill 48 was passed. So that began the process for us. That was actually a really helpful bill. And it laid out a few things. One was that it laid out a pilot study, and we have 7 districts working on a system-wide suite of services so that we can scale these kinds of wonderful screeners and interventions and high quality tier 1 instruction, as well as all the other tiers as you go up those tiered supports that our students need. They're really looking at it at that system level, and that's really exciting to me. We do have the evaluation of that year 1 of the pilot, and the analysis basically showed that we hit all our milestone markers, and it really is about changing adults first. And so we are working with leadership in these districts, we're working with teachers in the districts, and really creating the structures so that the system itself will become better. And you will get this one-pager, a one-pager and a follow-up email which lists all of these things, and also offers for you links to the evaluation so that you can read further. We also have an approved dyslexia endorsement program that is a program that gets approved by our Professional Standards Commission. Some folks who are on your panel here were on that design committee, as well as I was, and some of the folks here who are in our audience were. And so now, the first time ever, we have a dyslexia endorsement, and it is being offered by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different regional education service agencies and institutes of higher education. So for all of those educators who want to learn more, as of December of 2020, we now have places where they can learn more, and it adds on to their teaching certification. We also have created a dyslexia handbook. This one-pager will have a link to that handbook. That handbook is really a working document because the landscape for what's on the market and the research is continuously changing. So just know that if you ever have any criticisms of the handbook, we would really love to hear them, only because we will be revising this handbook annually. So we have put out the handbook in PDF form, which is easily accessible. We've also mailed 2 print copies to every elementary school and 2 print copies to every every district office so that they all have this dyslexia handbook. That was about as far as our money went. We did not get a lot of money in Senate Bill 48, but this time we do, so we can definitely do better. So from there, we are, the next big thing that we're doing is we are updating our student support team rule. And that's a state board rule. The hard thing about dyslexia is that it is also an identified specific learning disability. And I really want to make sure that our students get those resources if they need them. So we really didn't want dyslexia to sit parallel to special education. We wanted it to sit on top of special education so that it would become just part of how we do our regular everyday services. We just would be improving them. So so we have in that rule proposal a look at how we do universal screening if reading difficulties show up, how we do universal screening specific for dyslexia, and then how we would go through the process of identifying individualized services and interventions or an individualized plan for students who've been identified as having characteristics of dyslexia, whether or not they also qualify for special education services. So any child who is at risk of this should have that kind of specialized plan. So, so just know that we're in the midst of that. We do have a task force. That task force, now that vaccinations are more readily accessible, we have not been convening the task force during the pandemic, but we will be convening the task force soon. And that invite, in fact, I have a draft sitting in my email that I have to look at, and we'll get that invite out. So all of those are handbook or updates, and so I want to go through some of the chats or the chat questions to make sure that I've addressed some of your questions. Some people have been asking about the science of reading and the emphasis that we have on the science of reading. We do have an initiative that the governor has sponsored that includes endorsement of the science of reading. The science of reading itself should be part of high quality tier 1 instruction. And that's the message that we carry out in our work. The resources that we promote, of course, again, we don't have a ton of capacity. So we do promote resources that have been created by this Florida Center for Reading, which you've heard mentioned here. We also have the Regional Education Lab Southeast, which is part of the Institutes of Education Sciences. And they've produced materials for us, especially getting down into supports for families so that families can work at home on practices that reinforce the science of reading skills. And then we also have some tremendous resources with the Cox campus, which was developed with the Atlanta Speech School and the Rollins Center. And so we've been contributing to that design, and we provide a lot of communication as well as facilitation around getting more teachers into that. And we know that we've been getting some good numbers of participation into that. So we really, if at all possible, we would like to ensure that our tier 1 instruction is really at the highest level it can be. Again, so you don't have to separate a student who is coping with characteristics related to dyslexia. Instead, they are part of their peer group, and they get that access to the academic language and all the other things that are going on in the classroom. Some people have been talking about handwriting, and I want to emphasize that in Georgia, we do still have handwriting instruction in our standards. It is explicitly taught in grade 3 if it has not been taught prior to that. So just know that until that point, we really are reinforcing the idea of allowing children to navigate spelling and starting to learn how to match those letter sounds, and really getting into the idea that letters and sounds make sense. And so we don't get formalized into the conventions of those language pieces until grade 3.
Dr. Dooley, thank you
Yeah.
so much. I'm going to invite Dr. Gillis and Dr. Hoeft to join us. And I
Okay,
believe that Lisa has some other questions that we would like for them to also address. Thank you.
okay.
Yes, thank you for that Georgia update, and thank you again, Fumiko and Margie, for just the wealth of information that you've shared with us. So many questions came in through the chat and also questions when people registered. So I'm going to do my best in the next 5 minutes to sort of give some broad brushstrokes. I tried to categorize some of the questions. So thank you for all of your great questions to everyone who's attending as well. So one question that was asked a number of times was, how early can kids be diagnosed? Maybe I'll direct that to Fumiko.
I'll try to be brief. I'll be brief and we can elaborate if there's more questions related to this, but typically diagnosis is different from identifying risk. Often to be able to diagnose is usually kind of bound by the current definition, which is reading below grade level and often 1 to 2 years. So there's an inherent limit. You have to wait for the child to be able to read and then wait for them to be behind, which is inherently an issue. And so typically what children end up being diagnosed is grades 3 or so. But we have to shift our mentality from from diagnosing to identifying risk. That can be done much earlier, from kindergarten for sure, pre-K for sure, and preschool. And so that's what I would love to suggest, which is to change our mindset from diagnosing to identifying risk.
Great. Did anyone want to add to that? Margie, do you?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important shift in language, but important because we can't wait to identify children when we see the risk indicators.
And something that you emphasized, Margie, that was asked by a couple of people in the chat and in advance of the webinar, you emphasized the importance of dyslexia is a language disorder. Could you clarify exactly what you mean by that?
What I think about is that literacy acquisition is completely based on language development. And so, and because many teachers don't understand the relationship between language and literacy, I want to emphasize strongly how important receptive expressive language skills are to prepare children to learn to read. And children who are, have trouble with language acquisition on various levels, that's often a big red flag, right? That we want to be paying attention to. And so even though we think of children with dyslexia as having strong language skills, that doesn't explain the complexity of language and all the the various aspects of language that will contribute to children's literacy acquisition.
Thank you. This sort of category came up more in the pre-registration, not as much in the chat tonight, but there were several questions about English as a second language. So I would put this out to the whole panel. Can you provide any guidance on early identification of dyslexia for bilingual and non-English speakers? And kind of part 2 of that is the impact of dual language programs on children with dyslexia.
Fumiko, you want to take that one?
I was hoping you would volunteer when you unmuted yourself. That's a very difficult question. We do have current ongoing research in the San Francisco area on dual language learners, and those especially in English learners and in immersion programs, trying to look at this. I think so. The best approach, of course, if at all possible, is to measure in 2 languages and obtain converging evidence. Some of the measures are thought to be more transferable. So that if you measure one, there might be some information you can gain from the other. But the general rule of thumb is, if you can provide, and I know it's not possible for the many hundred languages that we have in the United States, so it's impossible, but at least for English and possibly Mandarin, Chinese, there are some measures that are out there that can be done in both languages. anything to add? I know I took the easiest
I mean,
pieces
I
out.
guess what I would add to that is just, especially for young children who are immersed in a language-rich classroom, and they're, exposed to English, while hopefully still speaking their first language at home. They acquire language pretty quickly. And I would say if the classroom instruction is rich and paying attention to some of the things that I spoke about earlier, again, the child who's not responding to the instruction, the rich instruction, that's an indicator that that child may have another problem, i.e. could be identified at risk for dyslexia or other reading difficulties. So I would just be paying attention to those children who are not picking up those language and literacy skills.
Just one or two more things to add. Thank you, Margie. I think I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot what I was going to say. I apologize. I think so. Vocabulary is a very tricky measure in English learners, as we know, and that is very tricky to measure even within English learners or bilingual children. So that's something to be very, very careful about. I think some, such as phonological awareness, is thought to be more kind of universal. So if you do see difficulties, even if you can't measure in their first language, if you see that they're struggling, I think that's really one indicator. I think another one is family history. So assuming if the parents had ample educational opportunities, and I know that's really hard to measure, and sometimes it's not possible because they haven't gone past elementary school, but there are some measures that people are trying to develop that is kind of should be resilient to different kind of parental educational experience. So asking family history, if that is a sensitive, culturally appropriate question to ask, could be useful information as well.
Thank you. One last question, because I'm mindful of the time and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. What is the parent's role in helping a dyslexic student or a struggling reader? That's to anyone who would like to take that large question.
I mean, I'll jump in for a minute. I think the parent's role is to be as supportive as possible and provide an environment that nurtures their interests, helps them develop their interests in learning, whatever they want to learn and whatever their talents may be, because we know that children who are dyslexic have to work a lot harder in school. So they need environments that are supportive. I think also parents who learn as much as they can about the questions they should be asking of the teachers, and how to be their very best advocate they can be for their child. And that there's such a steep learning curve in learning about dyslexia and all the associated comorbidity that Fumiko spoke about, that it's hard, but I think parents staying on top of that can be more supportive of their children.
And I'd like to add to that one of the biggest compounding issues when a child's been struggling to learn to read, whether dyslexia is at the case or not, is really background knowledge. And so the more experiences that a child has in life, the better. So if you suspect that your child is coping with this, with dyslexia, then I would suggest just flooding the child with wonderful learning experiences, going on walks, talking about everything, going out and visiting museums, going to the zoo, even just talking about things like riding in an elevator, and the different language that you can engage in that, because the more language that a child has, and the more background knowledge that a child grows, the better that child will be as a reader, even when they are coping with dyslexia.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for your wonderful questions and for your expert responses. Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you for the wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Dooley, Dr. Hoeft and also Dr. Gillis. We appreciate very much. We're sorry that our Q&A is not a little bit longer. I know there were a lot more questions. I also want to thank all the attendees who joined us this evening, and remind you that we will be sending a follow-up email in the next few days. And in that email, we will have links to the speakers' presentations, to the resources that Dr. Dooley mentioned, and also to a recording of tonight's webinar. So we hope that in the future you will join us again at the Schenck School and the Dyslexia Resource for future webinars and presentations. So thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great evening. And thank you again to all the participants and presenters. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Kim and Josh and Lisa for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Night, everybody. Thanks so much.
Good night, Josh. I'll be in touch. I think
Yes. Yes.
I'm really excited. You heard me give away the lead, so
I know. What great timing. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I'll be in touch. Talk to
Okay,
you.
wonderful.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.